With that covered, thank you so much for joining us this evening to celebrate Triumphant, My Journey, His Call by Dr. Akia Blandon. I'd first like to introduce our conversation partner for the evening, Benita Alexander. Benita is an award-winning television producer and CEO of Baraka Productions, a company dedicated to empowering women who are the survivors of love fraud. She is also the executive producer of the film He Lied About Everything, which documents how her fairy tale romance with a world-renowned surgeon turns into a nightmare. It follows Benita on her emotional journey to unravel her fiancé's devastating lies as she uncovers a trail of horrifying destruction that leaves patients dead. Benita's story has been covered in numerous television shows and podcasts, including The Con with Whoopi Goldberg, True Lies on ABC's 2020, and Wondery's podcast, Dr. Death. And now I'd like to introduce the star of the evening, Dr. Akia Blandon. With over 30 years, yep, y'all can do that, go ahead. With over 30 years of nursing experience, Dr. Blandon has facilitated the care of thousands of people with it throughout her career. Initially a high school dropout, she earned her doctoral degree in the midst of the pandemic. Akia is an accomplished public speaker focusing on self-care, forgiveness, healing, and conflict resolution. As the owner and provider at New Beginnings Healthcare, she provides primary care to those in need. She is also an associate professor and assistant dean of diversity and equity and inclusion at the Helen Fund College of Nursing in New York City. Observing the conditions in her community surrounding mental health, Akia returned to school for her postdoctoral certificate in psychiatric mental health, nurse practitioner. She desires to treat the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. And tonight we add to all of those accomplishments, published author. Congratulations and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. So, I have to put my glasses on for this, but when I was reading your book, I had a pen out because I knew I'd want to research and start highlighting it. I think it starts on page 23, and I started highlighting on page 24. So I want to start by reading what's on that page because I think there are a lot of things in your book that really kind of hit me personally and said a lot to me, and I think will say a lot to other people. But you write, "My story speaks of victory, of triumph, victory over injustice, abuse, unfairness, and many other painful realities that stack the cards against me. My story demonstrates resilience instead of despondency and despair." Is your goal with this book to show others that they can overcome adversity?
I definitely think that that's one of the goals. I'm a firm believer in that the things that we go through are not only for us. I think it's important that we demonstrate to those who are watching, because more people are watching, that they too can make it through. I think some of the things that I experienced threatened to take me out, made me feel like I wasn't worth being here, made me believe that I was less than human at times, made me contemplate ending my life. And so those are very real emotions. Those are very real things that people struggle with and fight through on a day-to-day basis. The things that you read, when you look at me, it doesn't appear like that's who I am or that's what I experienced. So in part, yes, I do believe that writing my story was to empower those who may need it.
Which is amazing and very brave of you. You're also incredibly brave because you launched into some really difficult personal stuff, really raw, subjects that are difficult to talk about, painful to talk about, and you kind of dive right in right away. I mean, within pages. I just want to read something again because this line really got to me, and I think we'll get to anybody that reads the book because you're writing about very openly about your innocence being stolen, about sexual abuse at a very young age. He told me that if he did not let him do it to me, he would do it to my younger sister, who was 3 years old. Something told me I need to protect her. I mean, you were 6 years old, which in of itself is heartbreaking. I mean, the whole thing is heartbreaking. I think I had to put the book down when I read this line, because you're 6 years old, you're talking about sexual abuse, but somehow you're putting that aside because you are trying to protect your little sister. There's so many questions, but why was it important for you to talk so openly and so rawly, really, about this?
I think on my journey to healing, I learned that it's the secrets that have power. I learned that when things are kept secret, they have the power to make you feel shame. They have the power to make you blame yourself. And experiencing sexual abuse at such a young age, I knew instinctively that I needed to protect my little sister. I knew and I'm not even sure if I wrote it in the book, as Sesame Street played in the background, I can vividly still recall, though the pain of the event is not what's elicited when I remember the event. But I knew that I wasn't the only one going through sexual abuse. I'm not the only one who's overcome.
At 6, you knew that?
No, I knew that as a writer, as an adult. At 6, I just needed to protect my little sister. I knew what I was experiencing hurt. It was physically painful. I knew innately that what I was experiencing was wrong. And so if I understood that for me at 6, my little sister, who I was always told to protect because I was her big sister, why would I want her to experience that? And so my story is not unique. And so in writing that, in starting the book with that, my hope, my intent was to grab the reader to say, if this is you, there's an end of this story. There are more pages. This may be where it began, but it certainly isn't where it's going to end.
Not where it ends. Yeah. You also, very early on, talk about the significance and impact of God in your life. And it's a big theme through your book. It's obviously very important to you and very personal. How has that shaped your whole journey, and why was it so important to include that in the book?
I am nothing without Jesus Christ. I am no one. When I tell you that the significance of God in my life very early on was clear, when I was standing on the rooftop ready to jump and someone randomly showed up, my childhood boyfriend randomly showed up. Was it random? When I sat on the fire escape contemplating ending my life, was that random? It wasn't random. I don't believe in random. So I can't tell my story without telling the significance of God in my life. I couldn't tell the story.
It's a powerful dichotomy because you're talking about really painful, horrific things, actually, that would have taken a lot of people down. And yet it's sort of counteracted throughout the whole book by this presence of feeling protected somehow, in spite of going through the unimaginable, really, So somehow, no matter what happened to you, you felt that something was carrying you through it.
I think that that's a very real thing. Oftentimes when we go through things, we focus on what isn't. We focus on the aloneness of it. We focus on the negative of it. But there's a passage of scripture that I hold on to, and it says that all things work together for good to them that love God, who are the called according to his purpose. It doesn't say the good things. It doesn't say the bad things. It doesn't say the painful things, but it says all things. I didn't get a choice in experiencing the bad. I didn't get a choice in experiencing the pain, but I do have a choice in how I allow those things to impact and dictate where I go next.
You talk a lot about a lot of different things, but one of your chapters is titled "Daddy Issues," which I think is an important theme to touch on for women. That's something I found with my own story and in talking to many women from all walks of life, that just the absence of a for whatever reason, of a healthy relationship with a father has such a drastic impact on a woman's life, and the ripple effects last for decades. Is that something you've found also in talking to other women that have been through, not necessarily the same thing you've been through, but just whatever kind of trauma or heartache it is?
Daddy issues are real, and they're real in various people's lives. My story was my father committed a crime and was taken from me for 28 years. As a result of not having him, I made some extremely poor decisions, looking for love in all the wrong places, right? Every little girl wants to be told that she's beautiful by dad. And so as I speak to women, as I work with mentoring women, which I do, I find that in one way or another, maybe dad was there, but he withheld love. Maybe dad was there and he worked a lot. Daddy issues transcend culture, transcends ethnicities, transcends socioeconomic issues, areas, right? Even the richest of rich and the poorest of poor could identify with daddy issues. So I thought that it was important that we look at that topic and say, hey, you may have them, but, right? Always adding a but. On my way here today, I make it a habit to call my dad, right? Because one of the other things I talk about is forgiveness. The pain of his decisions that I went through, I was able to work through. I was able to work through with God. I was able to work through with therapy. You know what? Because for me, it's Jesus plus therapy. I'm not the one that's just going to tell you religion alone. But, you know, I was able to call him on my way here and talk to him and cut up with him and tell him when I'm going to come see him, right? Again, adding the but.
Hugh, I was going to ask you about forgiveness next, because that's a huge theme throughout your book, and the importance in overcoming trauma and recovering and being triumphant and resilient involves forgiveness. And I also believe that without that, you can't move forward. And you talk about forgiving your mom, for not protecting you from abuse, for not doing a whole lot of things. And that's also very important, right? The forgiveness of the people closest to you for just being human, basically, right?
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer that unforgiveness is like drinking poison, but expecting the other person to die. I think when we hold on to unforgiveness, it impacts us. Most of the times, the people that offend us have moved on. They have forgotten the offense. And every time we see them, we rile up. We feel something. It's only when we let them go that we can truly move on and heal. And in terms of my mom, I did talk to her today too. We are really thick as thieves. And it's because you have to take a look at the things that people experience. What we go through kind of shapes how we look at life, how we experience life, and how we do life. And so I had to sit down on my anger, especially after becoming a mother, and realize some of the things and challenges my mother had to face growing up here in the Bronx. Had to, being the oldest of 9 children, having a mom who worked outside of the home, and she had to become the parent child. What was she missing? What didn't she have, right? And so would it be fair that I expect forgiveness? I expect forgiveness every day of my life. From my children, from the mistakes that I made, from my friends, when I forget to call, or, I say I'm going to call you back and they're still waiting to this day. From God, when I just screw up royally, which I do. So if I expect forgiveness, how dare I not give it?
Does that also translate to the man who abused you? There's a powerful chapter or part of your book where you talk about years later confronting him. You ran into him, which the very thought would send shudders down most people's spines, I think. And you handled it, I thought, incredibly bravely and with extreme class. How difficult was that for you, and why was it important to include that in the book?
I don't honestly think that it was difficult because I had forgiven him, even though he had not asked me. And I think that that's a key point for me to make. The person doesn't have to seek your forgiveness to get it. There's no requirement for that, because forgiveness is for you. It's not for them. And so that day in Mount Morris Park at this annual barbecue that my family does, my family and friends do, it was interesting because my uncle, who later became aware of who it was, because when you think about it, the people who hurt us in those ways are not typically strangers. They're people with access. They're people who know us, right? And so my uncle knew. And after I confronted him, he made this comment like, oh, I hear you're talking about me hurting you when we used to play around as kids. And I remember thinking to myself, are you smoking something? I was 6, you were 18. When were we kids together? But again, I had to go back to the fact that this has no power over me. This has no authority over me. And so I told him a few words. I'm not a saint. I haven't made it to heaven just yet. I didn't curse him out, but I definitely let him know that whatever delusion you're operating in, you need to figure it out and seek repentance for yourself. Don't die before you do, because you might not like where you end up. And my uncle saw us talking, and I remember my uncle, who's 6'3", so significantly taller than me, coming over, and I remember being a human shield for this man who may have been 5'7". Now, when I was a little girl, he seemed so big. I'm 5'10", so he's not so big anymore. And I remember being a protector for the one who hurt me. I became a shield. And in that moment, I think I had a personal revelation that, yeah, I really have moved past this. It really doesn't sting the same way. He walked away from that park whole. My uncle didn't go to jail. And guess who was the victor? It was me. Because the one who was designed to destroy me did it. So it didn't work. And so there was a lesson in forgiveness right there. It was so powerful for me to kind of think about as I drove back home to New Jersey at the time. It didn't work. And so, yeah, that was important, because I want people to understand that don't be married to the experience. Don't be beholden to the pain. A lot of time, the pain becomes familiar.
Yeah.
And we nurture the pain. And
Because
I want
that's all
people
we
to-
know.
Because it's all we know, right? And we've lived with it for so long. I want people to understand that there is a purpose to the pain and there is life after the pain. And that's why I had to include it. No.
That said, you also talk in the book very openly about this. This is not a straight road. The road to overcoming, the road to forgiveness and self-love and all of it is very bumpy and rocky, and there are pitfalls, and you're going to go down, and every time you kind of think you're done with it, you're not. What are your thoughts on that, and what advice would you give to people who are sort of in the throes of the ups and downs? And
I think that that's absolutely true. I can't tell you that this was linear, that I made the decision to forgive and I never cried again. Or I made the decision to forgive and I never thought of the person and got angry. Or I made the decision to forgive, say, my ex-husband, and when his child support didn't come on time, those feelings of anger didn't arise again. No, that would be a lie. So that up and down, that feelings of highs and lows, the mountains and valleys, the peaks and valleys, those are normal. And you can feel all of the feelings, but expect to get up. Failure happens if we don't get up. So when I'm in that valley, those emotions are real. My feelings are valid. My feelings are real, and they're okay to feel. But what I have a responsibility to do, or at least to myself, is to get back up.
yeah, very powerful. This is probably a difficult question in a way, but what is it that you want people to take from this book when they read it, or that you hope people will take from it?
I think that I hope people take away the lesson of resilience. I hope that people recognize that there is a bounce back. I hope that people feel what they feel, address the things that cause them to make poor decisions and to make challenging decisions and decisions that have them meeting the same human in a different body. And understand that there is a way through, there's a way out, that they can be triumphant, that there is a purpose to this thing we call life.
You say that at one point you write, at 19, I had lived through more pain than the average 30-year-old. And you talk about a Maya Angelou poem here that you love called Still I Rise. Tell me about that and why that is significant to you and what impact that's had on you.
Maya gave us a voice. As a poet, I believe she gave us a voice, and she put into words a lot of our feelings and a lot of our emotions. And Still I Rise, one of the parts of it says that you can write me down, or you can write me out with your bitter, twisted lies, and still I rise. The ability to rise beyond what you experience and what you feel and what has hurt you and what has caused you pain, it is significant. At 19, I had become a nurse. I was the mom of two sons. I lived on my own. I had not fully forgiven my family. I had not forgiven my abusers. I was in a relationship that I probably should have ran from. I had recently come to know Jesus as Lord, and that poem really just spoke to me. The ability to rise, the ability to get up, the ability not to be beholden to experiences, that there was some sort of hope. And I think in that poem, Maya literally gave me hope. And so that's why. And if you go into my bedroom right now, the poem, a good friend of mine burned it, wood burned it on wood and wrote out the whole poem. And it's literally hanging in my bedroom as a reminder to remember that I will rise.
Brave.
Yeah. That you'll make it. And I haven't arrived as a human, as a woman. You know, we have challenges every day. Every day, you know, I have the pleasure of being the mom of 5 amazing humans. And I said to a friend of mine just today, you know, when they're younger, they tie your feet. When they're older, they tie your heart. And so every day, I still have to rise. Every day, I still have to make it through.
But that's another part of your story. I don't want to give everything in the book away, but there was a point where you were told that you would never have children. And now you have 5, you know?
That's interesting. I had made the decision to have an abortion. And in my decision to have an abortion, there was some damage that I was told was done. And I was told that I would never have a child. And in that time, I happened to have been pregnant with twins, so I had aborted twins. And I was told that I would never have a child. And that in and of itself speaks to the redemptive power of God. Like, to go from you'll never have a child to having 5 children biologically, huge. And I have countless numbers of children by my heart that are born of my heart, not of my body. So, yeah, I mean, again, resilience. My life has been a testimony, and the story isn't mine alone.
Given how personal your story is and the fact that you are talking about things that are very close to you and to family members and people that you know, was that a difficult decision? Was that hard to write about? Did you have to have difficult conversations about, hey, I'm doing this, I'm writing this book?
Absolutely. My mom, it mattered, you know, I tell the story that I wrote my story and my parents are walking this earth. It would have been a whole lot easier writing it and they had gone on. but they hadn't. So I had to have a really difficult conversation with my mom, who I'm really close to, because I knew that writing my truth would cause her pain. And I wanted to tell the story, but I wanted to tell the story in a way that honored her. I believe in honoring my mother and father. And so she and I shed some tears. She said to me, "You're going to make people think that I was the worst mother in the world." And we had to work through that. And we did. And she's a champion for the book. She is very popular in Harlem. I call her the mayor. And on any given day and time, she has someone buying a book. "Kia, bring me a book. Kia, bring me a book." So I think being honest and open with her about, hey, this is what I need to do. It was healing.
Yeah.
And it was healing for our relationship as well. And I think it allowed it to come to another level.
I think we're getting the cue to open up for questions, but I hope you know how brave you are. I think you're incredible. You're very resilient, and it takes a lot of guts to write a book like this and to talk about these things, but it's really important. And I know particularly for women and girls going through things, but also I think this book is for everybody who's going through something difficult. So thank you for writing it.
You're welcome. And thank you for sitting with me today. I will say, when you say that it's for everyone, I was contacted by a rabbi on LinkedIn who purchased my book when I published it. I had never met him, not one day. And we followed each other professionally on LinkedIn. And he reached out to me and told me how impactful the story was and how he cried and how he couldn't imagine taking his Jewish children into a non-Jewish area, because there's a part of the book that kind of speaks about that. And he has since sponsored 100 books for 100 CNAs just on the strength of what he read in the book. When I initially started writing the book, I thought it would just be for women. But there have been multiple instances where men have said to me, "You opened something up for me, and I thank you." And so I'm grateful and I'm humbled that my story could impact anyone.
Yeah, and it has to make you know that you did the right thing by doing this.
Indeed it does.
No. Any questions?
So, Dr. Blandon, your story is truly inspiring. Why now? What was the impetus to have you tell this story now at this point in your life?
I think that's a great question. Immediately prior to writing the book, I held a very high-profile executive level job. I was a CNO of an extremely large facility here in New York City. And I was dissatisfied in so many different areas. I was unsettled. I was unhappy. I would go home at night and just feel like I'm not living my purpose. Like like if I left this world today, what impact would I have made? And I tendered my resignation because I felt like I needed to. And I tendered my resignation well into the six figures was I paid, almost $300,000 a year. I tendered the resignation without an income to replace that. I didn't have a replacement income. And I remember taking that step and feeling the most free I had felt in my life in a long time. And as I sat with myself and as I sat with the Lord, I felt like it's now time to tell the story. I asked you to step away from this job so that you could have the time to pen this book. I have known the title of my book for about 20 years. I knew what the book was going to be called for about 20 years. And I sat down with my co-writer in a cafe on a Sunday afternoon in October. I started writing in November, and it was in the editor's hands in January. So what made me do it. I think it was the lack of purpose that I felt. And I encourage anyone not to ignore that being unsettled. Don't ignore that. Don't ignore that there has to be more, or there is more that I'm supposed to do. We get this one life to live, and we need to live it. And I have a saying that I always say to people: I don't want to die young or old, but I want to die empty. I want to die having done everything that I was put on this earth to do. And I know that Triumphant was a part of what I was put on this earth to do. I think that was pretty long-winded, but I hope that answered.
Good evening, Akia. Thank you so much for sharing your story. You probably have no idea how many lives you've touched with your story and being brave enough to tell it. So my question was, you mentioned your mother is an advocate for the book. I just want to know, what did your father and your kids say? First of all, have they read the book? And second of all, what are their thoughts about your story?
So I can tell you that I'm not sure if they've read the book. But my dad, who works for Anheuser-Busch, has people buying the book on Amazon in his job. They don't even know who I am. But he has people buying the book. He and I have had a lot of work that we've done. Somewhere in my 20s, I had to go and have the conversation with him. And you can't assume that someone, even if they're your parent, know what you experienced. Sometimes you have to tell it. And so if he has not read it, he definitely promotes it. And my children, I'm a firm believer and an advocate in being frank and open and honest. I think that we don't know what our parents have gone through, and so we sometimes make the same mistakes. We sometimes duplicate the errors. And so my children, I've been pretty open with a lot of the experiences I've had. And so, if you talk to my 30-year-old, he'll tell you that I'm his best friend, and he'll tell you that I'm his hero. And if you talk to the boys, they'll tell you, that I'm their hero and that they're proud of me. I was on the phone with my son when I arrived here tonight, and he's like, "All right, superstar, see you later." So I think that they're pretty proud. I think I have a chapter called "Oops" that tells the story of my second son's conception. Can't imagine that was easy to read. But he knows his story. So I'm a firm believer, and no one should be able to tell someone you love something about you or your experience that you didn't tell them. Always take away that power and authority from people. So again, super long-winded, but I hope it answered.
I've answered. I think you might have answered, but I guess my question is, how is your story, your book, impacted men? What type of responses have you gotten from men? I mean, you mentioned a rabbi, you mentioned your sons, but other men who might have bought the book and responded back to you, how have that been, and how did that affect you as well?
There are two men, thank you for the question, there are two men that stand out to me. One is my co-writer, who originally started as a ghostwriter. He literally tells the story of how every Monday, because that was his reviewing what I gave him day, every Monday he would sit and cry. He would weep as he read. It caused him to address certain things in his life. And he's a father of daughters. And so it caused him to view things just a little bit differently. Another man that spoke to me about the book shared how it gave him a different perspective on how he was to love his girls and how significant his voice was in their lives and how impactful he should be and how present he should be in their lives. And so it shocked me because, again, I started writing this for women. So to think that there have been multiple men who have come out and said that this story helped them, or this story impacted or changed the way that they viewed certain things or changed their behavior, I think was absolutely amazing and truly blessed me. I think from the people that I have had the ability to speak to, I have been more blessed than I believe anyone could imagine. Writing this was like giving birth, right? It had to come forth. Hearing that things were good and hearing how things impacted people and hearing that people are healing as a result of it is like someone telling you that it's beautiful, that child is beautiful, or that child is destined for greatness, or that child has impacted their life, if that makes sense, if that analogy makes sense. So this truly has been a labor of love. Yeah. What he?
Thank you. So I've read the book. So there's a section in your book that you talk about your ex-husband, and how do you think that has impacted you overall as you look at men in general, from those that have abused you to those that have been unfaithful? How do you look at it overall now?
Woo-wee. All right. So honestly, that was a sore subject for me. The healing after infidelity is real. The work that has to be done after your trust has been betrayed is real. And I walked into my own bedroom and found someone. It wasn't that I heard about it. I didn't read about it. I didn't read a text. I saw that with my own eyes and talked to the woman who was in my home with my husband. And I think over the years, what it has taught me, one, the healing has taught me, is that every man is not the same. I am not the bitter, all men ain't bleep. I'm not here for the story that every man is going to cheat. All men are dogs. That is a myth. That is a lie. I don't believe that in any way, shape, or form. While I'm currently not in a relationship, I fully expect to be, and I fully expect to be in a loving, whole, complete relationship. I made the choice while raising my sons not to enter into another relationship because it was really important to me not to have my sons and my daughter see the round robin, have a bunch of uncles. I don't know if any of you have ever had some uncles. You know, it was important to me not to have that and not to see that. So now that they're 23 through 30, it's mama season. And so I'm fully expecting to have a relationship. So going through it, the pain of it, oh yeah, there was a time that I hated anything with a Y chromosome. Yes, ma'am, I sure did, right? But I had to process that, and I had to go through that, and I had to recognize that if I'm gonna move forward, it included forgiving him. And he and I danced at our son's wedding last year. So, you know, healing and wholeness is real. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, I know earlier you were mentioning the story about your sister and feeling the need to protect her. I'm just curious, after writing the book, what is that relationship now, and was she fully aware of what you were experiencing in those moments?
Great question. My sister was aware that I had been sexually abused, but I don't think she was aware. I know she wasn't when she read the book. My sister literally sat and read the book in 2 hours and a half. She sat and read the book. She was unaware of the protection piece. She has no real memory of that. We were close before this happened. It's only made us closer. My sister is an amazing woman and who has been triumphant in her own right. And so writing that whole big sister, I take that real seriously. And even now, she's taller than me, she's bigger than me, but it doesn't matter. I'm still the big sister. So her reading that, I think, only endeared her to me a little bit more. And so that's kind of the relationship. So it's actually benefited the relationship. And she actually said thank you She hated that I went through it, but she was grateful that she didn't have to. Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
Wonderful. How are you? I love your earring.
Thank you. You are a person that, as I'm watching you speak, I mean, like your soul just sparkles. I want to know, how do you, what are your daily practices that support this? It's an intentional choice to be a person who is positive, and that wants to promote like healing and wellness in their life. So what are some of the practices that you have in place that are daily or weekly that support this person that you are?
Thank you for that question. It is intentional. It is a choice, 100%. My personal walk is I wake up earlier, I exercise, I pray, I have quiet time where I meditate on God and I think about, okay, let me be intentional about setting my day. When I'm in the day, and there are people in the room who know that I might get a little twisted sometimes, I have to give myself a checkup from the neck up. I have to recognize that, hey, things are going to happen. You can't control what's going to happen to you, but you control how you respond to it. If I give you my emotions and you don't deserve them, then I've given you power to manipulate me. And so I often keep that in the back of my mind. Am I always successful? Absolutely not. I'm a church girl, if you have not figured that out. So I go to church, and I love singing, and I love to worship, and I love to read, and I love to be by myself. You see me here and you say I sparkle, but you wouldn't believe I love to be by myself. My little sister who's in the back, she can know we can be in the same house. We can be in the same house, and I will say 3 words the whole entire time because I love my alone time. And I think sometimes we pour out so much, but if you give and give and give and never pour back in, then you're going to be responding from bankruptcy. And I don't ever want to be bankrupt in my responses. I don't ever want to be not ready for a divine moment. I never want to be not ready to speak to the human that I'm destined to speak to that day. If I'm empty and I don't have it to give, what happens to that person? So I believe that nothing is by chance. So I have to do the things that I do: sacrifice sleep, wake up, pray, work out, do all of that. Because at one point in my life, I was sick, I was diabetic, I had high blood pressure, I was over 300 pounds. There are people in the room who can testify to that. And that's not my story. That didn't happen by osmosis. I didn't take a happy pill. I didn't take the ice or the fat burner or whatever else they're selling. It took intentionality. And we're intentional about a lot of things in this life. You choose what you place value on. And so being intentional is how I think I stay predominantly positive.
Okay, I think that's all the time that we have for questions. But would you like to leave us with any closing remarks?
You talked about when you walked away from that job, feeling that you hadn't found your purpose, feeling empty, I guess, basically. Has that feeling gone away now?
Absolutely. I love my life. I walked away from the job without replacement income, and I make more now than I did that. And so when you do what you're purposed to do, provision comes. Any job that you have is just your provision. It's never your purpose. So don't get it twisted and think that this is your purpose, the person who signs your check or the job that you do from 9 to 5. No, it's not your purpose. It's purely the provision to get you through to your purpose. And so I'm walking in my purpose now, so I'm not empty anymore.
Thank you. You're incredible.
It's good. Thank you.
Akia will now be signing books if anyone wants a signed book.
Thank you again, all of you, so much for joining us tonight. This was a wonderful conversation to participate in.
Thank you.